An online-only multiplayer first-person shooter, Destiny was released on September 9, 2014 and was developed by Bungie. It was the first game in a 10-year pact between Activision and Bungie, and marked on Bungie's part at least, their first new console franchise since Halo. On the first day of its release, Destiny sold over $500 million retail, which made it the biggest new franchise launch of all time. Development for Destiny actually began as far back as 2010, shortly after Bungie's Halo Reach release. It was codenamed Project Tiger, and Activision even promised Bungie an additional $2.5 million payout bonus if the game's Metacritic score was 90 or above. In mid-2013, a supercut of the game's story and mission structure were presented to Bungie upper management because the majority of work had been completed on the game engine missions and story. Jason Jones, Bungie's co-founder, felt the game was too congested, dense and linear based. The player should be able to choose anywhere they wanted to go at any time, so it was decided that the entire mission system of the game would have to be rebuilt before the game's September 2014 launch. With the game's storyline coming under question and the game effectively being rebooted, Joseph Staten, the game's writer and cinematic director, decided to leave the company. His team felt leaderless and isolated, and so instead of perfecting the game's narrative, spent extra time on gameplay and the feel of shooting. In effect, Destiny's story was written without writers. With the game's initial launch date missed and then postponed further in March 2014, Bungie would go on to the only logical next step and worry fans even further. On April 11th, 5 months before the game's eventual release, they fired the game's audio director and composer, Martin O'Donnell. He'd actually spent time working with Sir Paul McCartney in creating an 8-movement symphonic suite entitled Music of Spheres, but Activision went above O'Donnell's head and replaced it with their own music for the E3 trailer. As can be imagined, O'Donnell and Activision locked horns, and following a performance review in which he was accused of unacceptable behaviour, O'Donnell was terminated. He would go on to sue for improper dismissal and win unpaid wages, profit sharing and lost stock, but possibly one of the civil suit's largest triumphs is that 40 minutes of Music of the Spheres is now in public domain. With reception of the game mixed, Bungie actually went on to halt pre-release reviews, asking for people to save judgment and for the game to be reassessed when its social aspects were working and the game populated with thousands of gamers. While the game's lack of story or plot is regularly discussed, one thing that's often overlooked is that instead of Nolan North, him of Nathan Drake from Uncharted fame, being the original Ghost, a levitating artificial intelligence used by Guardians in the game, he wasn't the first voice actor to take the role. You see, before Taken King expansion, Peter Dinklage voiced the role. When it was originally announced that Dinklage would be Ghost in the game, fans were very warm to the idea, with his popularity at an all-time high because of his award-winning portrayal of Tyrion Lannister on Game of Thrones. People just expected him to be perfect for voiceovers. Bizarrely, it turned out to be just another stick for critics to beat the game with. Shame. Sorry, wrong family member. Despite how fans and critics alike felt, and some did enjoy his role, the overall consensus was the delivery of the lines were just dry and boring. Everyone to rip the plaster off in a single go. Bungie just decided to replace him, citing he was never available to record when they wanted him and that Nolan North was a pro. Even though it has its faults, Destiny went on to have a massive fanbase, and there's no denying the many over-the-top shootouts you can have. It wasn't as wide and open as was originally advertised, and just didn't commit in parts, but in short, it's a fun first-person shooter with role-playing undertones. It just seems to have come up short, trying to be all the different things it wants to be at once.